Hello and welcome to Bedtime History. Tonight, we are not delving into the ancient past. We are climbing aboard a commercial airliner on a cold, rainy night in the American Pacific Northwest, on the eve of Thanksgiving 1971. On this flight, a quiet, unassuming man in a business suit would commit a crime so audacious, so perfectly executed, and so cinematic, that it would instantly become a part of American folklore. He would hijack a plane, demand a fortune, and then, with a parachute strapped to his back, leap from the aircraft into a freezing storm and vanish from the face of the earth. His name, or at least the name he gave, was Dan Cooper. The media would forever know him as D.B. Cooper. For over 50 years, his fate has remained one of the greatest unsolved American mysteries. Did he survive the perilous jump and escape with his fortune, living out his days in quiet anonymity? Or did he perish in the unforgiving wilderness, his bones and his treasure scattered and lost to time? The FBI conducted one of the longest and most expensive investigations in its history, a massive cold case that remained officially open for 45 years, before they finally and reluctantly closed the file unsolved. But the story of D.B. Cooper is more than just the tale of a daring unsolved hijacking. It's a story about a man who became a legend, a folk hero to some, a symbol of rebellion against the system. And it's a story about the relentless, obsessive hunt to uncover his true identity. In the decades since his disappearance, a fascinating and bizarre cast of characters has emerged from the shadows, each one put forward as the real D.B. Cooper. Tonight, we will go beyond the well-known story of the hijacking itself. We will dive deep into the cold case files. We will act as armchair detectives, examining the evidence, scrutinizing the clues, and most importantly, we will put the prime suspects under the microscope. We will look at the decorated war veteran, the disgruntled airline employee, the career criminal, and the quiet family man with a dark secret. We will analyze the new evidence that has emerged in recent years, from DNA to rare earth minerals found on a tie, and ask the ultimate question. After all this time, can the mystery of D.B. Cooper finally be solved? So buckle up, as we take a flight into the heart of a legend and hunt for the man who jumped into thin air. Our story begins on Wednesday, November 24, 1971. It was the day before Thanksgiving, one of the busiest travel days of the year in the United States. At Portland International Airport in Oregon, passengers were boarding Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a routine short-haul flight bound for Seattle, Washington. The aircraft was a Boeing 727, a workhorse of the domestic skies. Among the passengers who walked across the rainy tarmac that afternoon was a man who appeared to be in his mid-40s. He was described as being about 6 feet tall, with dark hair, brown eyes, and an olive complexion. He was dressed neatly and conservatively in a black business suit, a crisp white-collared shirt, and a narrow black necktie, fastened with a mother-of-pearl tie clip. He carried a black attaché case. He looked like any one of 1,000 anonymous businessmen crisscrossing the country that day. He purchased his one-way ticket at the counter for $20, giving his name as Dan Cooper. He boarded the plane and took his seat 18C, in the rear of the aircraft. He lit a Raleigh cigarette and ordered a bourbon and soda from the flight attendant, a 23-year-old woman named Florence Schaffner. The flight was only about a third full, with 36 passengers and 6 crew members. At 2:50 p.m., Flight 305 took off from Portland, climbing into the dark, rainy skies of the Pacific Northwest. Shortly after takeoff, as the plane ascended towards its cruising altitude, Cooper handed a folded note to Florence Schaffner. Like many flight attendants of the era, Schaffner was used to businessmen passing her their phone numbers on notes. Thinking it was just another clumsy pass, she slipped the note, unread, into her purse. Cooper leaned closer. "Miss," he said politely but firmly, "you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner's blood ran cold. She retrieved the note from her purse. The message, written neatly in felt-tip pen, was chillingly direct. It confirmed that he had a bomb in his briefcase and that he wanted her to sit beside him. She did as she was told, her mind racing. She asked to see the bomb. Cooper calmly unlatched his attaché case just enough for her to see what was inside. She saw a mass of red-colored sticks, what looked like dynamite, attached to a large battery and a tangle of wires. Whether it was a real bomb or a clever fake, it was convincing enough. Cooper then stated his demands clearly and calmly. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary back chutes, and 2 reserve chest chutes. And he wanted a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon arrival. He instructed Schaffner to take his demands to the cockpit. When the captain, William Scott, was informed of the situation, he immediately contacted Air Traffic Control, who in turn notified the FBI and Northwest Orient Airlines management. The airline's president, Donald Nyrop, made the decision to cooperate fully with the hijackers' demands. The lives of the passengers and crew were his only priority. On board the plane, the other passengers remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding. They were told that their arrival in Seattle would be delayed due to a minor mechanical issue. For the next 2 hours, Flight 305 circled over Puget Sound, burning off fuel to allow the FBI and the airline time to gather the money and the parachutes on the ground. The $200,000, sum equivalent to over $1.4 million today, was assembled from several Seattle area banks. The money consisted of 10,000 individual $20 bills. In a crucial move, the FBI hastily photographed every single bill, creating a microfilm record of the serial numbers. They hoped this would make the money traceable and too hot to spend. The parachutes were sourced from a local skydiving school. On board the plane, Cooper remained calm and polite, even courteous. He ordered another bourbon and insisted on paying for it. He chatted with the flight attendants. His demeanor was not that of a desperate, crazed hijacker. He seemed cool, calculated, and completely in control. He also displayed a surprising knowledge of aviation. He knew the 727's flight characteristics, correctly identifying the flight time needed to burn off a specific amount of fuel. He was clearly not an amateur. At 5:39 p.m., the plane finally landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Cooper ordered the pilot to taxi to a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac, far from the main terminal. He demanded that the cabin lights be dimmed to deter police snipers. An airline employee approached the plane on foot and exchanged the bag of money and the parachutes for the 36 passengers, who were released, still unaware that they had been hostages in a hijacking. Once the passengers were clear and the refueling was complete, Cooper laid out the second phase of his audacious plan to the cockpit crew. They were to take off and fly south, towards Mexico City. He was specific about the flight plan. The plane was to fly at a low altitude, no higher than 10,000 feet. The landing gear was to remain down. The wing flaps were to be set at 15 degrees. And most importantly, the cabin was not to be pressurized. All of these instructions had the effect of keeping the plane's speed low, around 200 miles per hour, and ensuring the air pressure inside and outside the cabin was equal. He was creating the perfect conditions for a low-altitude, low-speed parachute jump. He then ordered the flight attendants and the remaining pilot crew to sequester themselves in the cockpit and not come out. This left him completely alone in the main cabin. The last person to see him was flight attendant Tina Mucklow, who had been his primary point of contact. He instructed her to go to the cockpit, and as she left, she saw him tying the money bag around his waist. He looked, she later said, calm and thoughtful. At approximately 7:40 p.m., the Boeing 727 took off from Seattle, heading south into a dark and stormy night. The weather was terrible, with heavy rain, low clouds, and freezing temperatures at their 10,000-foot altitude. Following the flight path were 2 F-106 fighter jets from a nearby Air Force base, scrambled to track the hijacked plane. But due to the poor visibility and the 727 slow speed, they never managed to get a visual lock on it. Sometime around 8 p.m., a warning light flashed in the cockpit of the 727. It indicated that the aft air stair, the retractable staircase at the rear of the plane, had been lowered. This was the unique feature of the 727 that made Cooper's plan possible. The crew called Cooper on the intercom to offer assistance. He replied with a single curt word, "No." That was the last time anyone ever heard from Dan Cooper. At 8:13 p.m., as the plane flew through a heavy storm somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, the pilots noticed a sudden upward movement of the plane's tail section. This indicated that a weight had suddenly been removed from the rear of the aircraft. D.B. Cooper, with $200,000 strapped to his body, had leaped from the back of a commercial airliner at 10,000 feet into a freezing windswept darkness over the vast, rugged, and unforgiving wilderness of southwestern Washington state. He had vanished into thin air. The plane, with the rest of the crew safe, eventually landed in Reno. An immediate search of the cabin found Cooper's black necktie and tie clip, 2 of the 4 parachutes he had requested, and the stubs of the 8 Raleigh cigarettes he had smoked. He had left behind tantalizingly few clues. The FBI immediately launched one of the most extensive and expensive manhunts in its history, codenamed Norjack, for Northwest hijacking. An army of agents, soldiers, and local police fanned out across the projected jump zone, a vast, heavily forested and mountainous area. They searched on foot, with dogs, and from helicopters. The search was grueling and dangerous. The terrain was brutal, and the winter weather was severe. They found nothing. No body. No parachute. No money. It was as if the man had been swallowed by the sky. As the weeks turned into months and months into years, the legend of D.B. Cooper grew. He became an anti-hero, a folk legend. In an era of disillusionment with the government over the Vietnam War, many people secretly cheered for the guy who had pulled off the perfect crime and gotten away with it. T-shirts and bumper stickers appeared with the slogan D.B. Cooper, "Where are you?" The FBI, however, continued their grim work. The official position was that Cooper could not have possibly survived the jump. They argued that a novice parachutist jumping at night into a freezing storm with 200 miles per hour winds, wearing only a business suit and loafers, into dense mountainous forest, had virtually no chance of survival. He would have been killed on impact, or would have quickly succumbed to exposure and hypothermia. The mystery for them was not if he died, but where his body and the money were. For 9 long years there was no break in the case. The trail was completely cold. Then, in February 1980, a discovery was made that reignited the investigation. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was on a family picnic on the banks of the Columbia River, at a place called Tennebar, about 20 miles southwest of the likely jump zone. While digging in the sand, he uncovered 3 rotting bundles of cash. The money was water damaged and partially disintegrated, but it was still identifiable. When the FBI was called in, they confirmed the unbelievable. The serial numbers on the bills matched the D.B. Cooper ransom money. They had found $5,800 of the original $200,000. This discovery was a double-edged sword for the investigation. On one hand, it was the first and only piece of hard physical evidence from the crime ever found in the wild. But on the other hand, it only deepened the mystery. How did the money get there? Tennebar was miles from the flight path. Had Cooper landed nearby and buried a portion of the cash? Had he lost it during the jump? Or had the money been washed downriver from a location much further upstream where he might have perished? Extensive dredging and searching of the area around Tennebar turned up no more money and no other clues. The discovery of the cash was a tantalizing breadcrumb that led nowhere. And for decades that was where the case stood. A perfect unsolved mystery. The FBI investigated over 1,000 suspects, but could never definitively name the man. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the Norjack case, concluding that their resources would be better spent on other priorities. But for the army of citizen sleuths, amateur detectives, and independent researchers who had become obsessed with the case, the hunt was far from over. It is this hunt for the man himself that we will now join. We will move beyond the hijacking and examine the fascinating gallery of suspects who have been put forward as the real D.B. Cooper. We will analyze the evidence for and against them, and explore the new scientific clues that have emerged in recent years. Let's begin with one of the earliest and most intriguing suspects, a man named Richard McCoy Jr. On the surface, McCoy's story is eerily similar to Cooper's. In April 1972, just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy, a Vietnam veteran and a BYU student, hijacked a United Airlines 727. He demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes. After releasing the passengers, he had the plane take off again and he, too, jumped out of the aft air stair over Utah. The similarities were so striking that many in the FBI initially believed they had their man. However, McCoy's escape was not as clean as Cooper's. He left behind crucial evidence and was arrested just 2 days later. He was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison. In 1974, he escaped from prison but was killed in a shootout with the FBI. Was McCoy D.B. Cooper? The authors of the book D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy made a compelling case. McCoy was a former Green Beret and an experienced skydiver. He had the skills to survive the jump. The methods of the 2 hijackings were nearly identical. However, the FBI officially ruled him out. McCoy's physical description didn't perfectly match the one given by the flight attendants for Cooper. His family provided an alibi, claiming he was at home for Thanksgiving dinner in Utah the day after the hijacking, which would have been nearly impossible if he just parachuted into the Washington wilderness. While the similarities are tantalizing, most investigators now believe McCoy was a copycat, inspired by the Cooper legend, not the original. This leads us to perhaps the most famous and widely publicized suspect in recent years, a man named Dwayne Weber. Weber was a World War II veteran and a career criminal who lived a hard life of petty crime and prison sentences. The case for Weber being Cooper was brought forward after his death in 1995 by his own wife, Jo. On his deathbed, Dwayne Weber confessed to his wife, "I'm Dan Cooper." At the time, she didn't understand the significance of the name. But later, as she researched the case, she uncovered a series of stunning circumstantial clues. She found an old plane ticket with the airport code THPOR, Seattle, Portland. She remembered a trip they had taken to the Columbia River area shortly after the hijacking, where Dwayne had walked down to the river's edge alone. She found that a knee injury Dwayne had suffered was consistent with the rough parachute landing. And most chillingly, she found an old wallet with a faded, bent piece of paper behind his IDA piece of paper consistent with the size of an aft air stair instruction placard. The evidence was compelling enough that the FBI took it seriously. They even tested a DNA sample from Weber against the partial DNA profile they had managed to build from the saliva on the cigarette butts Cooper had left behind. The result? It was not a match. Dwayne Weber, despite the compelling circumstantial case, was officially ruled out by DNA. This brings us to one of the most persistent and well-researched suspects, a man named Robert Rackstraw. The case for Rackstraw, a decorated Vietnam veteran with a shadowy past in special operations and the CIA, has been championed for years by a team of private investigators led by author Thomas J. Colbert. Colbert's team has assembled an impressive mountain of circumstantial evidence. Rackstraw had extensive military training, including parachute jumping. His physical appearance in the 1970s was a near-perfect match for the Cooper sketch. He had a history of criminal activity and a rebellious anti-authority streak. Most tantalizingly, a letter supposedly sent by Cooper to several newspapers in 1971 contained coded messages that Colbert's team of codebreakers claims points directly to Rackstraw and the specific military units he served with. The theory suggests Rackstraw, angry at the government over his treatment during and after the Vietnam War, committed the hijacking as a form of protest and revenge. Colbert's team is so convinced they have their man that they have produced a book and a documentary laying out their case. However, the FBI has remained publicly skeptical, stating that there is no direct evidence to link Rackstraw to the crime. Rackstraw himself, before his death in 2019, consistently denied being Cooper, though he seemed to enjoy the notoriety, often playing coy with reporters. For now, Robert Rackstraw remains a fascinating but unproven candidate. The list of suspects goes on, a bizarre parade of individuals, each with a piece of the puzzle that seems to fit. There was Sheridan Peterson, a World War II Marine veteran and a smoke jumper, who worked for Boeing in Seattle and was an experienced skydiver. He bore a strong resemblance to the sketch, but also denied involvement. There was William J. Smith, a New Jersey man whose deathbed confession was taken seriously by the FBI for a time. There was even a woman, Barbara Dayton, who had undergone gender reassignment surgery and claimed to have committed the hijacking as a man to prove she could. For decades, the investigation was stuck, chasing these ghosts, with no new physical evidence to guide them. That all changed in the 21st century, with the advent of new scientific techniques. The focus shifted from the men to the few objects Cooper left behind, specifically, his black J.C. Penney necktie. A team of citizen scientists working independently of the FBI gained access to the tie. They put it under a powerful electron microscope and made a stunning discovery. Embedded deep within the fibers of the tie were thousands of microscopic particles. These particles told a story. They found particles of rare earth elements like cerium and strontium sulfide. They found pure unalloyed titanium. These are not common materials. They are substances that would have been used in very specific high-tech industrial settings in the 1970s. The researchers concluded that Cooper likely worked as an engineer, a manager, or perhaps a chemist at a high-tech manufacturing or aerospace facility. The presence of titanium was particularly suggestive, as Boeing was pioneering the use of titanium alloys in its supersonic transport project in Seattle during that exact time period. This new evidence seemed to narrow the field of suspects significantly. Cooper was likely not just a common criminal or a simple disgruntled vet. He was a man with a technical background, a man who worked with his hands in a sophisticated environment. This scientific breakthrough has breathed new life into the case, steering the search away from old suspects and towards new possibilities. It suggests that the answer to the D.B. Cooper mystery might not lie in a deathbed confession or a coded letter, but in the microscopic dust a man unknowingly carried with him on his final fateful flight. So, after more than 50 years, where does this leave us? We are left with a crime that is, in its own way, a perfect work of art. A hijacking that was meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. An escape that was so audacious it seems to defy the laws of physics and probability. And a central character who remains a complete and utter enigma. Did D.B. Cooper survive? It is the ultimate question, and the one that still divides investigators. The FBI has always maintained that he almost certainly died in the jump. The conditions were atrocious, the terrain was lethal, and he was ill-equipped for the ordeal. In this scenario, his body and the remaining $194,000 are still out there somewhere, slowly being reclaimed by the vast wilderness of the Cascade Mountains. But the romantics and many of the private investigators hold on to the possibility that he survived. They argue that Cooper, with his apparent knowledge of aviation and parachuting, was no amateur. He knew what he was doing. He may have had an accomplice on the ground. He may have chosen his jump zone carefully. They point to the lack of a body as the most compelling evidence. In a search as massive as the one conducted, it seems unlikely that they would have found absolutely nothing if he had perished in the jump zone. For them, D.B. Cooper is not a skeleton in the woods. He is a ghost who got away. a man who pulled off the impossible and lived to tell the tale, though he could never tell it to anyone. The story of D.B. Cooper is more than just an unsolved hijacking. It has become a part of the American identity, a modern myth that speaks to our fascination with rebellion, mystery, and the idea of the lone individual who can beat the system. He is our outlaw, our Jesse James of the Jet Age. He is a blank screen onto which we can project our own fantasies of freedom and escape. The FBI may have closed their official file, but the case remains wide open in the public imagination. The army of citizen sleuths continues to dig, to analyze the evidence, to chase down new leads. They are driven by the belief that after all this time, a single clue, a forgotten memory, a new scientific test, could finally unlock the secret and give a name to the man who jumped out of a plane and into a legend. Thank you for joining us on this flight into the heart of one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The D.B. Cooper case is a masterpiece of true crime, a perfect blend of audacity, intrigue, and enduring enigma. If this deep dive into the Norjack cold case and the hunt for the real D.B. Cooper has captured your imagination, please consider supporting our channel. Liking this audio, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell is the best way to help us continue our investigations into these iconic American mysteries. Now it's your turn to join the manhunt. Having heard the evidence and the profiles of the main suspects, what is your theory? Do you believe D.B. Cooper survived the jump? Or did he perish in the wilderness? Which suspect do you find most compelling? And what do you make of the new scientific evidence from the tie? We would love to read your own detective work and your conclusions in the comments section below. The identity of the man who called himself Dan Cooper may never be officially known. He may forever remain a ghost, a silhouette falling through the night sky. But his story will continue to be told, a testament to a time when one quiet man with a briefcase and a bold plan could achieve a strange and lasting form of immortality by simply disappearing. Until next time, sleep well.